Let's look at an example of a three-piece piecewise function where we set up the function and then graph it using if statements in Excel. So our situation is we have a copy shop. They charge 5 cents per copy on most orders, but they have a discount for the larger orders. If the orders for more than 100 copies, the customer will be charged 5 cents for the first 100 copies, for each of the first 100 copies, and the remaining copies will be 3 cents each. In addition, the copy shop is considered a model where very large volume customers receive an additional discount and are only charged 2 cents per copy for the copies beyond 250. So looking at the model, for small orders, the model will just be 0.05x. 5 cents times the number of copies, x is the number of copies. And we'll use this model if x is less than or equal to 100. For the discount, the charge will be 0.03 times the number of copies that exceed 100. So we would use 0.03 times the quantity x subtract 100. But the customer also would have already been charged 5 cents for the first 100 copies, for each of the first 100 copies. So 0.05 times 100 equals $5 charge for those first 100 copies. So the second piece of the model is the $5 for the first 100 copies, and then 3 cents per copy times the number of copies that exceed 100. And we'll use this model for x greater than 100 but less than 250. The additional discount only kicks in if the order exceeds 250 copies. Then the customer will be charged 2 cents times the number of copies that exceed 250. So 0.02 times x subtract 250. But the customer also would have already been charged that $5 for the first 100 copies, 0.05 times 100, and $4.50 for the next 150 copies, 3 cents times 150. Now this is the tricky part. Only 150 copies were made at the 3-cent price. That's the length of the interval between 100 copies and 250 copies. That's where the 150 came from. Then 150 times 0.03 is where I got the 4.5 for our final third piece of the model. $5 for the first 100 copies, plus $4.50 for the next 150 copies, and then 2 cents per copy times the number of copies that exceed 250. And so our piecewise model then is this. 0.05x if x is less than or equal to 100. 5 plus 0.03 times x subtract 100 if x is between 100 and 250. And 5 plus 4.5 plus 0.02 times x subtract 250 if x exceeds 250. So next let's look at an Excel sheet. And I'll make this a little larger. Oops, didn't want to do that. There we go. Okay, so I've already got the model set up here. Looks like I went ahead and combined the 5 and 4.5 for 9.5, whichever way it makes more sense to you is fine. And then just to make a nice table here, make it a little prettier there. I'll pick a start value and stop value. I like to use 100 steps. And then my step size formula, the stop value, subtract the start value, divided by the number of steps. And then when we set up our table, this will equal our initial start value. And then below that equals the cell above plus our step size. And we want to F for the step size. We've got a formula we can copy down. And then down here, if I'm going to have 100 rows, I need my table to go down to, looks like, row 115. And then I can grab this, shift click, fill down, and I've got my table starting at 0, ending at 300. Okay, so my total cost, here's the hard part. I got to get that if statement written. So we'll start off with equal if. And again, remember, we get this little cheater notes here. First, we need a logical test. So we're going to check and see, are we below 100 copies, in which case we can use our simple model. So if the number of copies is less than or equal to 100, then we can use our simple model, 0.05 times the number of copies. But if the number of copies is not less than or equal to 100, what we need to do is put in a second if statement, because we need to do another check. We need to know if we're getting this discount or this discount. So what we'll check next is if the number of copies is less than or equal to 250. If it is less than or equal to 250, then we use our second model, 5 plus 0.03 times the number of copies, subtract 100, the number of copies that exceed 100. Otherwise, we need to use our third model. We don't need to do a check for the third model, because if we've already failed the test, is it less than 100, and failed the test, is it less than or equal to 250, we already know the number of copies exceeds 250. So we know we have to use a third model. Oops. Let me correct that itself. Okay. I hit something wrong there. Remember, in Excel, don't ever be afraid of making mistakes, because you can always redo it. Okay, let's see if I've got it in there right now. So I need to close some parentheses, because I've got a couple if statements there. Okay, so it's telling me if I make 0 copies, I'll be charged 0. That sounds pretty good. Let's go ahead and copy this down, see if it looks reasonable. And I'm going to make a couple quick changes. This is a nice way to kind of double check your formula. I'm going to make my table start at 95 and go to 195. Let me show you why I'm doing this. If I make my interval here between start and stop 100 to match the number of steps, I can look at my copies here and see that yes, I'm being charged 5 cents for each additional copy, but as soon as I hit 100, now I'm being charged 3 cents for each additional copy. And then if I go back, my next jump occurs at 250 copies. So I'll start at 245 copies and go to 345 copies. And so as I get closer and closer to 250, I'm still being charged 3 cents per copy. But right after 250 copies, I'm only being charged 2 cents per copy. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go back before I do my graph, and I'll go with 0 to 300. And I need to select my data, insert, and that looks pretty promising. I notice I've got 2 bends here in my graph. I've got the steepest slope here, where I'm being charged 5 cents per copy, a little bit more gentle of a slope here where I'm being charged 3 cents per copy, and then less of a slope here where I'm being charged 2 cents per copy. And then next I'd get in and label my axes and add a title, but it looks pretty good.